Hello and welcome to the Dublin Conversations. Orla, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm Orla Graham. I'm an insights consultant at Karma, which is a global media intelligence agency. I have been working in the media evaluation, media analysis, media intelligence industry, whatever you'd like to call it, for about 17 years now. So I've seen quite a lot of change in that time.
Yeah, but you have, and I understand how you got a role about insight. What does that work entail?
Yeah, so my role is really to help advise our clients around what best practice looks like when it comes to the measurement of their communications. And that really means making sure that we are providing good insights so that we're providing them with actionable insight. We don't want to just give them data for the sake of it. We want to make sure that we're giving them the right data and that we're explaining why it matters and what they can actually do with it as a result. So my job involves a lot of talking to clients, a lot of putting together measurement frameworks, so helping them to figure out, what is the link between the work they're doing, the objectives of the company and of the communications team, and then how do we actually measure and demonstrate all of that and learn from it. So I spend a lot of time talking to clients, a lot of time trying to get to implement all of that internally, and do quite a lot of thought leadership as well. So I talk at different conferences and events and so on.
So, what exactly is insight? I mean, what makes a good insight or a bad insight?
Well, it means telling people something they didn't already know. So
Yeah,
that's really important that it's not just describing a chart, for instance. It's not
yeah.
just the data that you can already see, providing additional context to it. But that context needs to be um, really aligned with what the organization is trying to achieve. There's no point, for instance, telling a company like Microsoft how they can maximize their reach. Everyone's heard of Microsoft.
Yeah.
You need to link it to what they're actually trying to achieve. So it might be about what's the brand value or the brand association that they're trying to drive? Is there a specific new product that they're trying to increase awareness of? What are the reputational and kind of associated messages and so on that they want people to take away from any of their comms work. So it's really important to make sure that we understand what the client's trying to achieve, and it needs to be actionable. The client needs to be able to go away from any of our reports and say, okay, I've got a sense of what worked. I've got a sense of what didn't. I know what I should do next. I know how to better reach this audience. I know how to better deliver this message. I know which kind of outlets I should be working with and those sorts of things. We really want it to be something that they can act on, where it's not just a nice to know. It's not just, checkbox kind of exercise by marking their homework. It's actually telling them something constructive that they can incorporate into their strategic planning.
So, I'm looking forward to your insights on our Dublin conversations and what we call our 5 steps to the Dublin window. And let's say really to step one of the 5 steps. So, we use the analogy that many people in the communication industry about like the early astronomers creating very complex maps of the universe, but with the Earth at its center. And we're suggesting that we need to step out of cages of existing thinking people in our industry can be bound by, define themselves as public relations, advertising, and communications. And really, at the center of the proposed universe is this idea that we're in a business of social interactions and managing effective social interactions. And at the heart of an effective social interaction is this idea of confidence, not so much in the usual sense of the word of people tend to use this to describe, say, great self-belief, but rather defining it as a reliable expectation of subsequent reality. And it can exist on sort of 5 levels, like firstly, confidence in your perception of reality, confidence in your sense of purpose, confidence you have in others and others have in you, confidence others have in each other, and sort of a zeitgeist confidence and mood of the time. And that, as I say, if you've got a compelling and coherent purpose, that enables you to more effectively socially interact. So I'm just wondering, any thoughts there about this sort of step one as our starting point there, Orla?
Yeah, I think that really makes sense to me that people just need to know what their starting point is, what they're doing, why they're doing it, understand the environment that they're working in. Um, a big part of what I do is around helping people to build frameworks, because very often what we find is clients launch into a communications campaign, gets to the end of it, and they suddenly think, oh, I need to prove whether or not this worked. Let's do some retrospective evaluation. And at that point, it's often a little bit too late, because that maybe their campaign wasn't 100% aligned with their objectives and so on, or they didn't fully understand what their benchmark was, like what their baseline is. If they're trying to improve something, you need to know what your baseline is. So for me, I think that means kind of a clear understanding of where are you at this moment in time? What is it you're trying to do? If you're trying to make a change, what are you changing from? What's your baseline? If you want to get from A to B, you need to know what A is for a start, and understanding the kind of environment and context that you're operating in. So whether that's understanding the external environment, it's going to be very difficult for luxury brands to try and talk about trying to get people to splurge loads of money on stuff at the minute, for instance, because there's a cost of living crisis. So making sure that you're picking your moment, that you understand everything, that you really have all of the information that you need to be able to make some of those decisions and to be able to get started.
You mentioned you've been in the industry a few years. I suspect you may not have seen the word purpose in many briefs in some of your earlier career, but have you noticed a trend and a rise in the significance of this idea of purpose among your clients?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think even just things around reputation have become a lot more important in general. So whether that's it all kind of falls into a big bucket around how people are viewed on a more emotional scale. Purpose, authenticity, ethics, reputation, these are kind of all different terms that to a certain extent mean something similar. It's how do people feel about your organization? And that didn't used to be something that anyone really was that bothered about. When I first started, it was very much about, have we gotten ourselves out there enough? It's been a bit of a spray and pray approach, kind of just trying to get as much content as they could. Now, I think people are really questioning that a lot. They really want to know how to move the needle. And it's partly because we're in this ever saturated environment. The amount of different organizations there are, the amount of different communications channels, it's really difficult for people to actually cut through all of that. And also because the public are a lot savvier, a lot more critical, a lot more don't know what the right word is, but they really want to think more about where they put their money, where they choose to interact, how they interact. It is becoming more important. And it's great to see that organizations are more than just commercial now. They're not just existing for the point of making money, that they do actually have a purpose, that they are engaging with society around them, and where do we fit into that? And I feel like quite 15, 20 years ago, maybe a lot of people working for a lot of these organizations wouldn't really have said they understood what the purpose of the company was. They wouldn't have felt any particular kind of sense of, oh, I'm doing good in the world. But this is something that is a lot more front of mind for people, I think, especially after the pandemic. We're just asking ourselves a lot more about what is our point as a race, as a human race. Like, what is the point of us? What are we here to do? And I think a lot more people want to really understand how what they do matters, whether that's in their own day-to-day job, whether that's an organization as a whole, whether it's how you as a consumer, for instance, can make a difference in the world by being more circumspect about the choices you make, being more mindful of what is the economic impact of a company? What is their ethical kind of basis before you decide to buy things? So I think it really has, there has been this really big shift, and I think it's been propelled a little bit by the pandemic as well. It's just caused us all to look inward a little bit more and think about what is our point on this planet? What are we doing to the planet? And it makes people then really want to think about purpose a lot more in both directions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking beforehand really about the advent of AI and I think tools like ChatGPT, where there's a potential for an even greater wash of complexity, noise, and confusion and distraction out there. So, do you think actually that sort of trend towards a greater reach for an identification of purpose that's going to continue with these new sort of challenges emerging?
Yeah, I think that there is the potential that there will be more polarization,
Yeah.
where you'll get the kind of people segmenting into these kind of groups where they are maybe more interested in that. They're kind of more concerned about the potential for misinformation, for instance, that likes of AI poses, and where they want to really make sure they're being very conscious, very mindful about what they do, and how they interact with the world. But then there is also the danger, I think, of technology allowing us to do everything quickly, that people just kind of, they gather momentum without actually thinking about what they're doing, and the kind of want for quick gratification and just now, have everything as quickly as possible, not really think about it. I feel like we could be getting to a place where people kind of are getting pushed in either direction, and there isn't as much middle ground.
Yeah. Bit like Aldous Huxley in Brave New World, in that, and as I say, it's not just fragmentation, but polarization now. Which,
Yeah.
well, I'll move on to the next stage then, really, of how do we then socially interact? And a delightfully simple model conceived by Professor Gareth Loudon of the Imperial College London, where of a dynamic of listening, connect, doing. So we engage with others by listening in its broadest sense of the word. We connect what we've heard with our situation, environment, and do can be a development of idea to a tangible outcome. And then it's a pumping, vibrant system of feedback there, with the idea of purpose at the heart, that ostensibly the more deeper and more committed you are to your purpose, the more vibrant the flow going forward. And we live in a world where sociologists can establish sort of universal laws of human behavior, where of 2 out of 3 people would help a stranger, which means that 1 out of 3 doesn't. So this could be the sort of prime instincts that drive between we-led thinking, which is where your response is based on the communal good, the common interest, and me-led thinking, which is about self-interest. And the Dublin conversation suggesting that this could be the potential for developing a philosophy around public relations potentially being a we-led philosophy, and maybe advertising being a me-led. And also we've seen emerge this word comps, which is frequently used, but doesn't really have any formal definition. So a lot to unpack there about listening, connect, do, we and me-led, and the idea of comms. Any thoughts there, Orla?
I think the listen part is so important, and that is often where communications falls down.
Yeah.
Not just kind of, I think communications as an industry, but I think as individuals. And I don't know if this is a sort of an impact of the technology that we all use, and we have these kind of quite insular worlds where, we have everything served up to us through our algorithms. We have everything kind of at our fingertips in our phones, where we're quite me-centric in, you think about social media, it's all about you. It's all about putting out there how great you are and what a great time you're having or not having, or and I think that has slightly potentially changed the way in which we interact with the world, where people don't listen enough. They're not listening, they are waiting to speak. And I think that for the communications industry, that can often be very much the case as well, where there isn't enough listening, there isn't enough research happening initially to find out, well, what do people actually think and feel and need? And how do we connect to that and then do the things that they need? People are often trying to jump over that and get straight to the do bit.
Yeah.
And wondering why, things aren't landing. It's because you haven't actually listened to anyone. You haven't actually taken the time to find out, what your audience needs. You haven't really looked at the society that you're in to kind of figure out what's the lay of the land. So yeah, I think that it's a very impactful model, and I think it's something that communications professionals in particular need to really spend some time thinking about and dwelling on.
Yeah. You've inspired me there, Orla, because it strikes me that there's perhaps two types of mode here. One is the rapid, frantic listen, connect, do, which we, as you say, with people, it's very superficial engagement with listening, but frantic emphasis on doing. And yet the other side is in contrast that you've got the potential for greater listening, empathy, and so on, which, as I say, strikes me that there's almost like a gearing here, or some sort of like multiple dimensions of speed that we could perhaps develop some form of process model around there.
Yeah, I think this definitely needs to be a sort of a process that is followed, where people have to make sure they're building in that time to listen, that they're not just assuming that they know what people want to hear. They're not just assuming that they have all of the answers, or that everyone's like them. I think that's the problem with the echo chambers that we're all kind of living in, where we assume that our experience is pretty much the same as everyone else's. So if we'd be happy with something, then so would everyone else. And we're not really aware of just how much of a diversity there can be across people's lived experiences.
Yeah. And we've got an issue of like we-led and me-led thinking. Is that something you sort of come across, those sort of instincts at work with the different clients you have to deal with?
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting one. I think that because I typically work more with PR teams
Yeah,
who tend to be having a little bit more of a two-way conversation
yeah,
than advertising, which is, pretty much in one direction for the most part. I think we see a little bit less of the me led because they are understanding a little bit more that they have to figure out how does this fit in
yeah,
um, to kind of the wider world? How does this fit in with what the audience needs? Um, I think there probably isn't enough understanding of we on a broader term.
yeah,
I think it's probably not encompassing the whole kind of society enough.
yeah,
It's not thinking about the broader landscape. It's thinking in quite a transactional way of, okay, we have a product that you can use. That's us, as in, there's a we, me, and you. They're not thinking about everybody else and how that fits in, and kind of, really just looking at the bigger picture, just stepping back and taking stock for a moment.
yeah. And then this word of comms. I mean, is it a word you use to describe your work, or a word that your clients use? What's your experience of
Yeah,
comms?
it's the terminology around the industry is really interesting. It used to be pretty straightforward where it was advertising and marketing and PR.
Yeah,
And, now we talk about it in lots of different ways. It can be communications, it can be earned. Um, yeah, like we definitely talk about communications and comms a lot. I think that is how most of our clients tend to describe themselves, but we are seeing more overlap. And I think that communications tends to get used as kind of quite a sort of catch-all for
yeah,
anything that involves talking to an audience in any way. But it's interesting because, we don't always see things sitting in the right places.
yeah,
For instance, internal communications within an organization often sits with the HR function.
yeah,
And then you've got a disconnect with people who are professional communicators and who maybe are more skilled at crafting a message.
yeah,
And you get kind of different points of view and mixed messaging and so on coming across.
yeah,
But yeah, I think it's something that I think these are all terms that get used quite interchangeably, and that's not necessarily always correct.
yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
difficult then to understand, well, what is it you're actually trying to achieve?
Yeah. Okay, well, brings on to the next stage about step three, and identifying how we social by listening connect do. Well, what do you need to achieve in your social interactions? And inspired by the work of people like behavioral psychologists like Professor Daniel Kahneman, who identified that we're emotionally driven animals, identified sort of five key heuristics, rules of thumb, that you need to sort of engage with and succeed in for effective social interactions. And those five like goals, as we call them, are being known, which tallies with an industry sort of usage of the word awareness, but also likability. And it's not necessarily like Facebook likes, but it can range from effective liking to respect, admiration, and even paradoxical liking, where you like to dislike someone. So think of media figures like Piers Morgan and so on. You've also got trust. And then front of mind, even though you may be well known, because people are essentially lazy in their thinking, you need to be front of mind when they're making decisions. And lastly, social proof of being talked about, the I've heard factor. And we believe in the Dublin conversation, these actually potentially frame any strategy, campaign for how you manage your social interactions. Any thoughts there on this model there?
Yeah, I think this is I sort of use a slightly more simplistic version of it because often with measurement, we need to try and make things as simple as
Yeah,
possible for clients so that they can communicate about them internally easily. And I often use a see, think, do model. It's very blunt. I always preface it with that. But at its most basic, it means that communicators, what you're trying to do is have people see your coverage.
yeah,
You need them to know who you are, know what you do, be aware of you. You need them to think a certain way. So you need them to, think whatever it is they want you to think. So if it's that you're trustworthy, if it's that you're innovative, if it's that you're good value for money, whatever those things may be. And then you want to get people to do a certain thing. So you need to be able to facilitate that action, whatever that action may be. So anything from signing a petition to actually, buying a product. So that is often the approach that I have taken to communications when it comes to how to measure it, making sure that we are measuring across all of those, that we're not just focusing, for instance, on, oh yeah, people absolutely know who you are. You're front of mind, you're talked about all the time. But what about those other things, for instance, liked and trusted? Do they like or trust you? Because if you look at just one part of it, you're not getting the whole picture. And it's very easy to perhaps think that you're being more successful than you are, or even less successful than you are, depending on how you're looking at it. So that does ring true to me. I think that there is a slightly transactional element of it as well that needs to come in around what is it you need them to do. Whether that is, if you're trying to sell them a product, making sure that they've got all of the information they need to go and get the product, or if it is trying to change hearts and minds, what is it that you're trying to get them to do? Are you trying to get them to donate money, to sign a petition, to volunteer, to, have difficult conversations, trying to make sure it's clear what people should come away from that interaction with?
Certainly you're sparking lots of thoughts here. That actually, I love the see, think, do, and I'm just trying to see how that parallels the listen, connect, do. That seeing is that the equivalent of listening. Getting people to be aware of it, connecting the thinking and doing. And you've got me thinking about do the known, like, trusted, front of mind being talked about, provide a subset for each of those listen, connect, do dimensions, again for analysis, potential measurement, and providing a framework there.
Yeah, I think they fall into similar buckets, for sure. And I think that's it, is that people often skip over some of those steps when they're trying to understand if they've been successful in their communications or not. So they often look at one of them because it's easier to look at. So my role is to try and make sure that we've got a fairly even and holistic approach to it, where we're getting a true sense of what's the impact that you're actually having. And yeah, I think understanding how people make decisions is really important in that aspect as well. So the see, think, do model that I often use, it correlates to the top end of the typical marketing funnel, awareness, consideration, interest, and so on. So it sort of overlaps with that a little bit, but I think this is a kind of an even more granular kind of look at that kind of awareness and interest and at the very top end of the model.
I think what you provoked there is perhaps, is there we're looking at essentially like a two-dimensional model here, but is there a third dimension showing like the journey through those different stages and so on, possibly there?
Yeah.
Well, it brings on a step 4, which is in the same diagram there, about how we connect. We have 5 like choices of how we have our own, and own can be your own behaviors, your own reputation, how you interact, as well as your own like media channels. And we're also introduced the element of nudging now, about choice architecture, how you can influence behavior without even communicating, which I would suggest this provokes the challenge that if people were saying they're in the communications industry, well, if you're employing something like nudge, you're not necessarily directly communicating. So I just wonder, again, any thoughts about these 5 dimensions, and again, whether is anything missing or anything more important than the other within those 5 choices?
No, I think it's very interesting. It's quite similar. We typically use a peso model, so paid, earned, shared, and owned.
Yeah.
And this obviously has the addition of nudge, which I think is something that, since COVID, people have become a lot more familiar with, because there's been a lot more discussion about how you actually get the behaviors or get the impact that you need from people. I've certainly started to see a lot more about nudge theory and behavioral science around nudge techniques and so on as a result of that. Yeah, I think it's really important to understand all of the different things that can impact on how people make decisions. We tend to want to go for the simplistic approach, which is see a thing, do a thing. Put an advert in front of you, you click through into it, bought the product, end of. That's not how anyone makes a decision.
Yeah.
We make decisions in such a complex way, where, yeah, maybe you've seen an advert for something, but then you have a chat with somebody about it, or you spot something that's kind of slightly linked somewhere else. And, our brains are not that simplistic where it's just A, B, C. they work in all of these kinds of bizarre ways, and we do our own research on things, and that can bring up all sorts of content and communications, whether it's paid, earned, owned, or otherwise, or what other people are saying about you. So yeah, I think really understanding the different kind of audience journeys that your audience is going to have, depending on what it is you're trying to ultimately achieve, is incredibly important. I don't know that I have fully gotten my head around all of it. I'm not a behavioral scientist. And I'm always kind of a bit starry-eyed whenever I meet with behavioral scientists. Just the amount of stuff that they research and get their heads around is incredible. But I do think there is need for a lot better understanding of that within the industry, because it's not linear. It's not just I put a thing in front of you and suddenly your mind has changed and you're going to do whatever I want you to. Fortunately, it's not as simple as that.
They'll probably be able to explain why you're starry-eyed, but
exactly.
Brings us on to our step 5, which is about what we call regenerative comms, where there's a need actually to any social interaction to replenish the wider social fabric of trust, togetherness, and being able to get together. So that every time you do something positive or constructive, it feeds into the wider social ecosystem that enables us to operate in the first place. Likewise, if you get, say, a politician who tells a lie and is seen to be lying, and they might tactically gain a short-term advantage, but it's at a cost of like the wider loss to the sense of communal trust we have in each other. And I just wonder, any thoughts about this dimension, about the need for any sort of social interaction, not just to be effective within its immediate parameters of sender and receiver, but also to be conscious and aware and make a contribution to this wider environment, this wider ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's that old saying, it takes 20 years to build a reputation, 20 seconds to destroy it, something like that.
Yeah.
Where, like once you have lost somebody's trust, it is very difficult to get it back. And I think that there is often a misunderstanding of that, of how quickly it can change, of what the long-term and short-term implications are, of what that kind of looks like. You may not lose all your customers overnight, but it doesn't mean that you're in a good position. So yeah, really understanding that kind of that aspect of trust, and that it is social contract, really, that, we've all got with each other, that there is a basic there is an ethical baseline that we're all going to adhere to. We're not going to lie. We're not going to behave in a immoral or unethical way. And yeah, this comes back to the purpose element, obviously, as well, around people increasingly wanting there to be more clear understanding of, what's the purpose that we've got, where we're in this situation where climate change is causing all sorts of disasters right now, this moment, across the world, floods, fires, famine, all sorts of things. And, we've also got various other crises afoot, and people are really thinking about, well, what's the impact that I make in the world? Am I leaving it a better place? How do I choose which companies or organizations to, give my money to or to interact with? Are they leaving it a better place? And really, openness, I think, is the key to all of that. You have to just be transparent around if there has been a failure in some regard, putting your hands up and saying, yep, we really screwed that one up and we're sorry. And this is what we're going to do to make it better, and just being very open, not being defensive. Because I think what people are looking for most from any kind of communication is honesty and humanity. This is going to sound like a very tenuous link, but this made me think of a lot of brands who have been on Threads recently. So Threads obviously is kind of the new social media platform from Meta to try and kill Twitter, or X, or whatever we're supposed to call it these days.
Yeah.
And, what I've found very interesting about it is that because nobody really knows what it is or how to use it, or, kind of what you're meant to be doing there are a lot of brands on there who are just having a lot of fun. And you can see that there is a human behind the account, and they're all just having fun with it. They're being silly, and they're talking to, other brands who are essentially their competitors, but they're all kind of getting in on the joke together. And it's really, a lot of people have kind of commented on the joyfulness of it. It's quite a different place from Twitter to that regard, because people are having fun, they're being silly, they're just being humans. And there is that little, I don't know if that technically falls within the definition of nudge theory, but it is that sort of thing where you're just kind of thinking, oh, I'm sort of looking at those brands in a very slightly different way now, because I can see the humanity coming through. And it's not just a kind of, they let the intern on the social media one day and then immediately took it down.
Yeah.
It's been going on for a few weeks, and it does make you think a little bit differently. And I think that's just what people are often craving, is that sense of just humanity and honesty and openness and transparency. And I think that is how you communicate purpose. That's how you establish trust. That's how you regain it whenever you have done something to lose it, is by being open and honest and human ultimately.
Some fascinating insights there about the advent of the threads, and it's actually what you're describing there is being there, is helping to replenish, for encouraging and providing a flat platform for people to be agreeable, as a human together. And it's fascinating watching your body language, just describing it. You can just see the added joie de vivre to life. I'm just wondering, you mentioned about sort of the need to the danger of like losing trust. But I'm just wondering whether actually confidence, the idea of confidence, is a more powerful asset, and that trust is a sort of a passive asset, but then it becomes an agency when you either have or haven't got the confidence. It's the confidence that's the enabler. So I've lost trust in you, therefore I'm not confident in using you. And I'm just wondering whether that's a sort of a distinction that you think could be between the two, and that they're not just interdependent, but there's an additional dimension, an additional energy and of implementation and activity for social interactions there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, I think. And I think that we often use the word trust as if it is something quite simplistic.
Yeah.
You trust people, you don't. I want to know what's my trust like. I want to measure trust. You have trust barometers and stuff out there. And it is actually such a complex thing that is made up of so many different touch points, so many different aspects. And and I think that it all comes down to, for me, I guess I maybe see some more similarities between confidence and kind of authenticity or transparency. Just having the confidence to actually say, this is where we are, this is what we're doing, this is the landscape we're operating in, this is what we did right, this is what we did wrong, being open, transparent about things. So I sort of see, I guess, authenticity and transparency maybe as being closer linked to confidence. But I feel like a lot of times these are all just different aspects of the same thing. They kind of all build upon each other and borrow from each other and interlink in a way that it starts to muddle my brain quite a lot when I think about it too much.
But I'm just wondering, I had a bad experience with the airline Ryanair, so I would proclaim that I don't trust them. But I've used them, and I'm about to use them on our forthcoming trip to Sligo at the Dublin Conversations. And so I may not trust them, but I've got confidence that if I book the ticket, they'll get me from A to B and so on. So as you say, I think there's a lot of interplay there. And one of the challenges I think Dublin Conversations is exploring is about how can we get greater clarity around these different things, which brings us really to the end of our 5 steps. And as I say, by doing these 5 steps, it enables you to sort of step outside the existing cages of thinking that people often use, say, of advertising, public relations, communications, behavior change, and so on, to see look for a bigger window where you can explain things without actually using those terms. But that's not to say to do away with them, but offer the potential to repurpose, reframe, or replace with better ideas. So having done the 5 steps, how do you now feel?
Yeah, I think this has really helped me to think a bit differently about some things. And I think I'll be borrowing the Listen Connect to for sure when it comes to
Please, we
a lot
believe in
of the
abundance, and
yeah,
I'll be borrowing your one as well. See if we can do it.
yeah, because so many of the conversations that I have with clients, it is about trying to break down, okay, what is it you're actually trying to achieve and how? And I think that this helps to view things in a less transactional way, because often there is that desire to try and make things, concrete, black and white, simple, A, B, C. And ultimately it isn't. Communications is about human connection. It is not simple. It is complex. It doesn't work in a linear fashion. It is quite a complex thing. And I think that this is definitely offering me more tools and more questions to be able to get to some of those points with clients and get sort of the right answers so that we're all clear on what's trying to be achieved on any point.
And really, thanks for that. And really, is there anything you think the Dublin conversation should be doing different?
Oh, that's an interesting one.
If you were us, should we be doing that we may not be doing or could do more of? Or
Well, obviously, with my measurement hat on, I'm always sort of thinking, how do we measure all of these things? Once we figured out what they are, how do we
yeah,
measure them? And that's where, the analytical part of my brain wants to put things into buckets. And the problem with this is that you can't, as I just said, these things are more complex than that. You can't put them into neat silos.
yeah,
I think kind of being able to relay this and to be able to kind of adapt this to different types of communicators. Because whilst there will be a lot, and certainly a lot of the ones that I work with are kind of thinking about the bigger picture things, because it is about trust, it's about reputation, it's about authenticity, all of those kinds of words, purpose. There are a lot who are ultimately tasked with doing something a little bit more transactional. So understanding how they can bring this kind of conversation into that more transactional sort of day-to-day work that they maybe have to elevate it a little bit. I think that is potentially something that might be useful for people in those kinds of roles.
yeah. So again, emphasising both the practicality and the immediacy, which hopefully we're looking to do for our toolkits and tools. But as I say, I take on certain board about the measurement, and it was interesting the point you made about where it provoked the idea of a third dimension to the model, where we could then monitor and measure the progress. So, in terms of anything specific, you think we should be doing beyond what we've discussed, or just more of, or
Yeah, I think it would be great to see sort of some of the outcomes of these after you have the meetup in Sligo. I think it would be great to see some models coming out of it that can kind of really help to shape people's thinking. One thing that has always struck me whenever I talk to communications people, they're very clear on understanding why they should plan and strategize and think about things, but they just often don't have the time. So I think that there need to be models, there need to be frameworks and so on in place that can really help them to do that. That, can be something they can implement easily into a planning cycle so that they're not just kind of constantly doing, and they're not actually taking the time to step back and think. So yeah, I think having a framework or a model of some description that people can, use to be able to understand how can they put this into action? How can
yeah.
they actually implement this into their day-to-day?
Yeah. Well, I would encourage anyone to check out, which we believe is the largest sort of set of free tools given. We've got over 34 tools, including one on how to overcome the haven't got time monster. As I said, but mindful of that, and also mindful that we're always open to new ideas, new suggestions.